I'm Jennifer Calhoun, 29 years old. Until 3 months ago, I believed family meant having each other's backs no matter what. Then my sister Carolyn proved that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty when she produced a will that left me with nothing after our mother died. I sat in that lawyer's office, watching Carolyn's satisfied smile as she claimed our family home. The antiques, even Mom's art supplies. Mom's last words to me were, "Promise me you'll keep painting, Jenny. Promise. Me, you'll remember what really matters." What Carolyn didn't know was that I had been sleeping on Mom's bedroom floor for 6 months, holding her hand through chemo treatments and middle of the night, panic attacks. But here's what makes this story unbelievable. Hidden in Mom's things, I found something that changed everything about what I thought I knew about our family. How do you steal back a legacy that was never meant to be inherited? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Savannah. Morning air hung thick with magnolia and regret. I stood outside what used to be my childhood home. 3 days had passed since the will reading, and Carolyn had already changed the locks. The historic Victorian house on Forsyth Park stood like a betrayal against the backdrop of Spanish moss and centuries-old live oaks. Its wraparound porch now forbidden territory. I'd grown up believing this house would always be home. Mom used to sit on that very porch, painting watercolor landscapes while I practiced tattoo designs on oranges beside her. She'd laugh at my shaky lines and say, "Art isn't about perfection, Jenny. It's about truth." Now, Caroline's rental car sat in our driveway like a declaration of ownership. My phone buzzed with another text from my best friend. "Emery, coffee. Now, I have cinnamon rolls and a plan." Emery's vintage bookstore. Between the lines, occupied a narrow building on Bull Street, squeezed between an antique shop and a cafe that served the best shrimp and grits in the historic district. The familiar smell of old paper and vanilla. Candles wrapped around me as I pushed through the door, setting off the brass bell that had announced my arrival since we were teenagers. "You look like hell," Emery said without looking up from behind the counter, her curly red hair escaping from a messy bun. She'd been my anchor since middle school, the kind of friend who showed up with ice cream during breakups and bail money during stupid decisions. "Thank you for that honest assessment of my emotional state," I replied, slumping into the reading chair by the window. "Caroline's already hired movers. They're coming tomorrow to clear out everything." Emery finally looked up, her green eyes flashing with indignation. "Everything? Even your mom's art supplies? Especially those. Apparently they're worth more than I thought." The words tasted bitter. Mom's easel, her collection of antique brushes, the paint tubes she'd mixed by hand. Caroline saw dollar signs where I saw memories. "This is insane, Jen. Your mom would be rolling over in her grave if she knew Carolyn was selling her paintings." That's what hurt most. Mom hadn't just been an artist. She'd been my artistic soulmate. While Carolyn pursued her MBA and climbed corporate ladders, I'd stayed in Savannah working at the tattoo parlor by day and painting by night. Mom and I would spend hours in her studio, a converted bedroom upstairs where afternoon light streamed through gauze curtains, talking about color theory and life philosophy in equal measure. "She always said the house would go to both of us," I murmured, watching tourists stroll past the window with their cameras and guidebooks. We talked about it constantly. I was going to convert the carriage house into a proper studio, maybe teach art classes for kids. So what happened? People don't just change their wills overnight. That was the question that had been gnawing at me since the lawyer's office. Mom had shown signs of confusion during her final months, but Dr. Peterson assured us it was normal for cancer patients on heavy pain medication. Caroline had visited exactly twice during those 6 months, once for the diagnosis, once for the funeral. Yet somehow she convinced Mom to sign a new will that left everything to her. The bell chimed again, and Miles Ortega stepped inside, carrying a large flat package wrapped in brown paper. My heart did that annoying flutter thing it had been doing lately whenever he appeared. We'd met 2 weeks ago when I brought Mom's unfinished painting to the Savannah History Museum for preservation consultation. Miles was the kind of quiet, thoughtful man who listened more than he spoke and noticed. Details other people missed. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his dark eyes meeting mine with concern. "I heard about the will. I'm sorry, Jennifer." News traveled fast in Savannah's art community. "Thank you. I'm still processing it all. Actually, that's why I'm here." He set the package carefully on Emery's counter. "After you left the museum yesterday, I kept thinking about your mother's painting. There was something about the brushwork that seemed familiar, so I did some research." My pulse quickened. "What kind of research?" "Your mother's signature appeared on several pieces we have in our archives. Paintings donated anonymously over the past 15 years. But here's the interesting part. They were all signed with her maiden name, Helen Sinclair, not Helen Calhoun." Emery and I exchanged glances. "Mom never mentioned donating anything to museums," I said slowly. Miles unwrapped the package, revealing a stunning landscape of the Savannah riverfront at sunset. The technique was unmistakably Mom's, her signature way of layering watercolors to create depth and movement. But I'd never seen this painting before. This was donated 3 years ago with a note saying it was part of a larger collection. The donor requested complete anonymity, but the museum keeps detailed records of provenance. When possible. "Larger collection?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Jennifer, I think your mother may have been secretly donating her artwork for years. If that's true, there might be documentation that could help establish her actual wishes regarding her estate." The implications hit me like a physical force. If Mom had been giving away her art under her maiden name, it suggested a level of planning and intention that directly contradicted Caroline's narrative of a confused, dying woman making impulsive decisions. But why would she use her maiden name? Emery asked. Miles looked uncomfortable, like he was about to share information he wasn't supposed to have. Sometimes people create separate identities for their art when they want to protect something. Or someone. Protect from what? I don't know. But Jennifer, if you're serious about understanding what your mother really wanted, I think you need to start with her art. Real artists don't just change their signatures randomly. I stared at the painting, my mind racing. For 29 years, I thought I knew my mother completely. We'd shared everything: artistic techniques, personal struggles, dreams for the future. But apparently, she'd been living a secret creative life that I knew nothing about. Where would I even start looking? I asked. Well, Emery said thoughtfully, if your mom was anything like mine, she would have kept records. Obsessive, detailed records. Did she have a desk? A filing system? The memory hit me suddenly. Mom's antique secretary desk in the living room, the one with all the small drawers and hidden compartments. Carolyn had mentioned having it appraised, which meant she hadn't gone through it yet. I need to get into the house, I said, standing abruptly. Tonight, before the movers come. Jennifer, Miles said carefully, I don't think breaking and entering is the answer. It's not breaking and entering if I still have keys. Emery grinned, the expression I'd learned to fear since childhood. I love where this is heading. What's the plan? There is no plan. Caroline's flying back to Atlanta tonight for some corporate emergency. The house will be empty, and I still have my key until the locks get changed tomorrow. This sounds like the beginning of a very bad idea, Miles said, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Or the beginning of finding out what really happened, I countered. My mother spent 40 years in that house. If she was hiding something, I need to know what it was. The afternoon sun was already starting to slant through the bookstore windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In a few hours, it would be dark enough to slip into my childhood home without attracting attention. The thought terrified and thrilled me in equal measure. I can't ask you guys to help with this, I said, though I desperately hoped they'd volunteer anyway. You're not asking, Emery replied, already reaching for her purse. I'm volunteering. Besides, someone needs to be there to bail you out when you start crying over old family photos. Miles hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. I'll bring a flashlight and my camera. If we find anything significant, we should document it properly. Looking back, that moment in Emery's bookstore was when everything changed. Not the will reading, not even Mom's death, but the decision to step into the shadows of her secret life and discover what she'd been protecting all these years. As we made plans for our midnight mission, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom had somehow orchestrated this entire situation. She'd always been 3 steps ahead of everyone else, seeing patterns and connections that escaped the rest of us. Maybe losing the house wasn't the end of my inheritance after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of finding out. What she'd really left me. The key turned in the lock with the same familiar click I'd heard 1,000 times growing up. But tonight, it felt like breaking a sacred seal. Caroline's rental car was gone from the driveway, and the house stood dark against the Spanish moss shadows, its windows like closed eyes keeping secrets. I can't believe we're doing this, I whispered, though no one was around to hear us. Technically, you still live here until the estate is finalized, Emery pointed out, following me up the front steps. We're just retrieving your personal belongings. Miles brought up the rear, his camera bag slung over his shoulder and a high-powered flashlight in his hand. Where exactly are we looking? Mom's secretary desk first, then her bedroom. If she kept records of donations or anything else, that's where they'd be. The front door opened with its usual groan, and I was immediately overwhelmed by the smell of home. Lemon furniture polish, the lavender sachets Mom kept in closets, and something deeper that was just Mom. My throat tightened as I fumbled for the light switch. Don't, Miles said quietly. Neighbors might notice. Use this instead. His flashlight beam revealed the living room exactly as I'd left it 3 days ago. But somehow everything looked different now. Smaller, more fragile. The antique furniture that had seemed permanent and immutable suddenly looked like items in an estate sale catalog. The secretary desk sat against the far wall, its dark mahogany surface gleaming in the flashlight beam. Mom had inherited it from her own mother, and I'd always been fascinated by its intricate system of small drawers and hidden compartments. As a child, I'd begged her to show me all its secrets, but she'd always laughed and said, "Some mysteries are meant to stay mysteries." Sweetheart, start with the obvious stuff, Emery suggested, opening the main drawer. Bank statements, insurance papers, that kind of thing. I pulled out stacks of paperwork while Miles documented everything with his camera. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: utility bills, medical correspondence, receipts for art supplies. But tucked beneath a pile of bank statements, I found something unexpected: a business card for Sinclair Studios with a post office box address I didn't recognize. Guys, look at this. Miles aimed his flashlight at the card. The design was elegant but simple. Just the name Helen Sinclair in script font with original watercolors beneath it. No phone number, no website, just the P.O. box. Your mom had a business? Emery asked. Not that I knew of. She always said her art was just a hobby. But even as I said it, I remembered all those afternoons when Mom would disappear for hours, claiming she was running errands or visiting friends. If she'd been conducting business I never knew about, check the small drawers, Miles suggested. In desks this old, the real secrets are usually hidden in compartments. I started working through the tiny drawers systematically. Most contain the usual detritus of daily life: paper clips, rubber bands, old postage stamps. But the fourth drawer felt different when I pulled it out, heavier, and when I removed it completely, I could see that the space behind it was deeper than it should be. There's something back here, I said. Reaching into the hidden compartment, my fingers closed around a small wooden box, and when I pulled it out, my heart stopped. The box was carved with intricate roses, the same pattern that decorated Mom's. Wedding ring. But this wasn't something I'd ever seen before. Open it, Emery urged. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, were 3 items that would change everything I thought I knew about my mother's life. First, a small oil painting no bigger than a playing card, depicting a man's hands holding a paintbrush. The technique was Mom's, but the signature in the corner read H.S. Helen Sinclair. Second, a bank account statement from a Savannah credit union I'd never heard of. The account was in the name of Helen Sinclair, and the final balance made me gasp. $47,000. Third, and most shocking of all, was a letter written in Mom's careful handwriting, but addressed to someone called My Dearest Thomas. Read it out loud, Miles said softly. My hand shook as I unfolded the paper, which was dated just 6 months ago, right around the time Mom's cancer diagnosis became terminal. My dearest Thomas, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I know I promised to keep our secret forever, but circumstances have changed, and I need to ensure Jennifer understands the truth about who I really was. By the time she reads this, I'll be gone, but my love for you will live on in every painting I created during our years together. I stopped reading, my mind reeling. Thomas? Who the hell is Thomas? Keep going, Emery said gently. I've spent the last 20 years of my marriage living a double life, and while I regret the deception, I cannot regret the art that came from our love. Every painting I donated to the museum under my maiden name was inspired by the happiness you gave me. Carolyn will never understand this, but I pray that Jennifer, with her artist's heart, will forgive me for being human enough to need more than duty and obligation. The letter went on to explain that Thomas was an art professor at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, whom Mom had met at a gallery opening 20 years ago. Their relationship had remained secret and largely emotional rather than physical, but it had rekindled Mom's passion for serious artistic work. The P.O. Box address is for our correspondence. I continued reading. The bank account contains the proceeds from paintings I sold through galleries in Charleston and Atlanta. This money was meant to be Jennifer's inheritance, her freedom, to pursue her art without financial worry. Please make sure she receives both the money and the truth about why I created my secret artistic life. The letter was signed, Forever Yours, Helen, and included a small key taped to the bottom of the page. I sat back on my heels, stunned into silence. In the space of 5 minutes, I discovered that my mother had conducted a 20-year emotional affair, built a secret artistic career, and hidden nearly $50,000 from her family. Jesus, Jennifer, Emery breathed. Your mom was living a whole other life. Miles was studying the bank statement with his flashlight. Look at the dates of these deposits. the regular monthly amounts going back years. She wasn't just selling. The occasional painting, this was a consistent income stream. My mind raced through decades of memories, reframing them in this new light, all those afternoons when Mom disappeared. Her sudden bursts of creative energy that seemed to come from nowhere. The way she'd sometimes get a distant look in her eyes when she was painting, like she was somewhere else entirely. She was in love, I said quietly. All this time she was in love with someone else. But she stayed with your father, Miles. Pointed out, she kept her family together and created this entire secret world to sustain herself, Emery added. That's either incredibly romantic or incredibly sad. Both, I said, feeling tears start to build. It's both. The key at the bottom of the letter was small and brass, the kind that might open a safety deposit box or a locker. But where? And what else had Mom hidden from us? We need to find this Thomas person, I said, standing up with new determination. And we need to figure out what this key opens. Jennifer, Miles said carefully, are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we're prepared for. I looked around the living room that had been my sanctuary for 29 years, thinking about Caroline's satisfied smile at the lawyer's office and her plans to sell everything that had made this place home. Then I looked down at the letter. In my hands, proof that Mom had been preparing for exactly this situation. My sister thinks she took everything that mattered, I said, but she doesn't even know what really mattered. Mom left me a different kind of inheritance, and I'm going to claim it. Emery grinned. The expression I'd learned meant we were about to embark on something that would either be brilliant or get us arrested. So, what's the plan? First, we're going to SCAD tomorrow to find Thomas. Then we're going to figure out what this key opens, and then I paused, looking around the room one more time. Then we're going to discover what my mother really wanted me to have. As we carefully replaced everything in the desk and prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mom was somehow orchestrating this discovery. She'd always been protective of me, always worried that I wasn't assertive enough to claim what was rightfully mine. Maybe this hidden letter and secret bank account were her way of giving me the tools to fight back. Walking out of the house that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the cancer diagnosis. Hope. Caroline might have the legal documents and the family home, but I had something she didn't even know existed. The truth about who our mother really was. And sometimes, the truth is worth more than any inheritance. SCAD's campus sprawled through Savannah's historic district like an organic extension of the city itself, with converted warehouses and renovated mansions housing some of the most prestigious art programs in the country. I'd walk these streets 1,000 times, but never with the nervous energy that coursed through me as Emery. Miles and I approached the painting department. We realized we have no idea if this Thomas person even still works here, Emery said, checking her phone for the third time. It's been 20 years. He's here, Miles replied, consulting a printout from the SCAD website. Thomas Whitmore, Professor Emeritus, still teaches advanced watercolor techniques. His office is in Potter Hall. The name felt strange on my tongue. When I tried to say it out loud, Thomas Whitmore. The man who had apparently shared my mother's secret emotional life for 2 decades while I remained completely oblivious. Part of me felt betrayed by Mom's deception, but a larger part was fascinated by the idea that she'd been capable of such deep, hidden complexity. Potter Hall hummed with the familiar energy of art students rushing between classes, their portfolios, tucked under arms and paint-stained fingers gesturing as they debated color theory and technique. The smell of turpentine and acrylic paint triggered memories of my own art school dreams, dreams I put on hold to stay close to Mom during her illness. "Third floor, room 314, Miles said, leading us up the stairs past walls lined with student. Art worked out my heart hammered against my ribs as we approached the office door. "What do you say to your dead mother's secret love? How do you introduce yourself to someone who knew a version of your parent that you never suspected existed?" The door was open, revealing a cluttered office filled with paintings, books, and the organized chaos that seemed to define all serious artist spaces. Behind a desk covered in graded student papers sat a man in his early 70s, his silver hair slightly disheveled and paint stains on his button-down shirt. He looked up as we approached, and I saw the exact moment recognition dawned in his eyes. They were kind eyes, a warm brown that crinkled at the corners from decades of smiling, and when he saw me, they filled with a sadness so profound it took my breath away. "You're Jennifer," he said softly, rising from his chair. "You have her eyes and her hands." I looked down at my hands, suddenly self-conscious about the small tattoos that decorated my knuckles and the paint that seemed permanently embedded under my fingernails. "You knew my mother," I said. It wasn't a question. "I loved your mother," he replied with quiet dignity. "For 20 years, I loved her in the only way she would allow. Please come in." "Sit down. I've been expecting this conversation since Helen passed." Thomas cleared student portfolios from 3 chairs, and we arranged ourselves in his office like actors in a play none of us had rehearsed. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Emery, bless her, jumped in with characteristic directness. "Jennifer, found a letter Helen wrote to you, and a bank account, and a secret artistic identity we never knew existed." Thomas nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving my face. "She told me she'd hidden information for you to find." Helen was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, planning for contingencies. Most people never considered. "Tell me about the affair," I said, then immediately regretted the harsh word choice. "I'm sorry. Tell me about the relationship." "It wasn't an affair in the traditional sense," Thomas said carefully. "Helen never left your father, and we were never ... physically intimate. Our connection was emotional and artistic. She needed someone who understood her creative soul, and I needed someone who saw the world the way she did." He turned to a filing cabinet and pulled out a large sketchbook, placing it carefully on the desk between us. "Maybe this will help explain. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The sketchbook was filled with drawings of my mother, but not the version I knew. These sketches showed a woman who was radiant, laughing, completely absorbed in her art. In one drawing, she was standing at an easel, her hair catching sunlight as she painted. In another, she was sitting in a cafe, gesturing animatedly while making some point about technique or composition. "We met at a gallery opening in 2003, Thomas continued as I turned pages. "Helen was there with your father, but she kept gravitating toward the paintings while he networked with other doctors. We started talking about brushwork, and I realized she had an intuitive understanding of watercolor that most of my graduate students never develop. But she always said art was just a hobby for her." I protested. That's what she told herself to justify staying in a marriage that was slowly suffocating her creative spirit. "Your father is a good man, Jennifer, but he never understood that Helen needed art like other people need air." I thought about Dad, who had been supportive but practical about Mom's painting. He'd built her a studio and bought her supplies, but he'd also made gentle jokes about her little hobby and suggested she might want to take up tennis or book clubs instead. "She started coming to my office hours," Thomas continued. Officially, she was auditing classes, but really, we were having conversations about art and life that went deeper than anything either of us had experienced before. For 20 years? Miles asked. For 20 years. We met for coffee every Tuesday at a little place near River Street. We attended gallery openings together when your father was traveling for medical conferences. And we painted together, sometimes in my studio here at SCAD, sometimes in that little space she rented downtown under her maiden name. My mind reeled. She had a studio downtown? Thomas nodded, above the antique shop on Bull Street. She paid for it with money from her paintings. Helen was incredibly talented, Jennifer. She could have had gallery representation, maybe even national recognition, if she'd been willing to pursue it openly. But she wasn't willing? She was terrified of disrupting your life, your father's practice, Caroline's perception of the perfect. Family, Helen carried enormous guilt about needing something beyond what her marriage provided. I thought about all those times Mom had seemed distracted or melancholy, how she'd sometimes get a distant look when Dad talked about retirement plans or family vacations. I'd attributed it to artistic temperament, but maybe it had been the weight of living a divided life. Tell me about the money, I said. The bank account. Helen was more successful than she let anyone know. Her paintings sold consistently through galleries in Charleston and Atlanta. She used her maiden name to maintain separation between her secret artistic life and her family identity. Emery leaned forward. How much money are we talking about? The account you found contains about $47,000, but there's more. Helen established a trust that should be maturing right about now. The total is closer to $120,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. Mom had accumulated over $100,000 through her secret art career, enough to change my entire future, while I've been struggling to pay rent and buying cheap art supplies at discount stores. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice cracking. We talked about everything. I thought we talked about everything. Thomas's expression was infinitely compassionate, because she was protecting you from having to choose between loving her and judging her. Helen knew that Carolyn would never understand or forgive the emotional complexity of her situation, but she hoped you might be different. Different how? Artists understand that inspiration comes from unexpected places. That love isn't always simple or conventional. That sometimes we need to create secret spaces to nurture the parts of ourselves that don't fit into other people's expectations. I stared down at the sketchbook, studying a drawing of Mom laughing at something Thomas had said. In this version of herself, she looked free in a way I'd never seen. Happy in a way that made me realize how much sadness she'd been carrying in. Her daily life. She loved you more than anything, Thomas said quietly. But she also loved the version of herself that existed in our conversations about art and beauty and meaning. She didn't know how to integrate those two loves without destroying something precious. Miles had been taking photos of the sketchbook, pages with permission, documenting this hidden history of my mother's artistic development. Now he looked up with a question I hadn't thought to ask. What happened to her studio downtown, her supplies, her paintings? Thomas smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. She left very specific instructions about that. The key you found opens a storage unit where she kept everything she didn't want Caroline to discover during the estate process. My heart began racing again. Everything? 30 years of paintings, her professional art supplies, business records, and one more. Things she wanted you to have, her final painting. The one she finished the week before she died. The room spun slightly as I processed this information. Mom hadn't just hidden money from Caroline's inheritance grab. She preserved an entire artistic legacy that documented her secret creative life. I want to see it, I said. All of it. Thomas reached into his desk drawer and pulled out his second key, this one attached to a tag with a storage facility address. She made me promise to give this to you only if you came looking for answers. Helen said if you never questioned the official story, then you weren't ready to handle the truth about who she really was. But I did come looking. Yes, you did. Which means you're ready to discover what your mother really left you. As we prepared to leave Thomas's office, he handed me one more item, a sealed envelope with my name written in Mom's careful handwriting. She wrote this after her diagnosis, he said. I was supposed to give it to you at the funeral, but Carolyn made it clear that my presence wouldn't be welcome. I stared at the envelope, afraid to open it in front of witnesses. Whatever Mom had written would change how I understood our relationship, and I wasn't sure I was prepared for more revelations. Take your time with it, Thomas said gently. And, Jennifer, your mother's greatest regret wasn't the secret life she lived. It was that she waited so long to trust you with the truth. Walking back through SCAD's campus, I felt like I was carrying the weight of an entire hidden universe. Mom's secret love affair, her successful artistic career, over $100,000 in hidden money, and now a storage unit full of paintings that represented 30 years of the creative life she'd hidden from her family. Carolyn thought she'd taken everything that mattered when she manipulated Mom's will. But she'd only taken the surface layer of Mom's life, the house, the visible possessions, the public identity of Helen Calhoun, Doctor's wife and mother, the real inheritance, the money, the art, the truth about who Mom had been when she was most authentically herself, belonged to me. And I was finally ready to claim it. The storage facility sat on the outskirts of Savannah, one of those anonymous beige buildings that dotted suburban landscapes like forgotten secrets. Unit 247 was halfway down a corridor that smelled of metal and dusty air, and my hand shook as I fitted Thomas's key into the lock. You don't have to do this alone, Emery said, standing beside me with a box of tissues she grabbed from her car. She knew me well enough to predict the emotional breakdown. That was coming. We can wait outside if you need privacy, Miles added, his camera bag slung over his shoulder, but his expression suggesting he understood this was about more than documentation. No, I said firmly. I want you here. I need witnesses to whatever I'm about to discover. The lock clicked open and I rolled up the metal door to reveal a space that took my breath away. The storage unit was organized like a miniature art gallery, with paintings carefully wrapped and stored on wooden racks, boxes labeled in Mom's precise handwriting and professional lighting that she must have installed to properly view her work. Holy shit, Emery whispered, then immediately covered her mouth. Sorry, but Jennifer, look at all this. There were easily 50 paintings visible, ranging from small watercolor studies to large canvas works I'd never seen before. Mom's evolution as an artist was documented here like a secret museum of her creative soul. Early tentative pieces from the 1990s progressing to sophisticated, confident work from recent years. She was incredibly prolific, Miles said, moving carefully between the storage racks. This represents decades of serious artistic practice. But it was the easel in the center of the unit that drew my attention. A single painting was displayed there, covered with a paint-stained cloth that I recognized from Mom's official studio at home. A handwritten note was pinned to the cloth, for Jennifer, the truth about who I was. I approached the easel like it might explode, my heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever was under that cloth represented Mom's final artistic statement, painted while she was dying and kept hidden from everyone except Thomas. "Are you ready?" Emery asked softly. I pulled away the cloth and immediately understood why Mom had saved this painting for last. It was a self-portrait, but unlike any I'd ever seen. The canvas was literally divided down the middle, showing two versions of the same woman. On the left side was the Helen I knew, the doctor's wife, the careful mother, the woman who wore appropriate clothes and attended charity functions and kept her artistic ambitions modest and contained. Her expression was serene but somehow empty, like she was performing a role rather than living a life. On the right side was the Helen that Thomas knew, vibrant, passionate, completely absorbed in the act of painting. Her hair was Messier, her clothes splattered with paint, her eyes alive with the kind of creative fire I'd only seen in glimpses throughout my childhood. But the most striking element was how the two halves connected. Instead of a harsh dividing line, Mom had painted an intricate border that wove the two identities together like a braid. Tiny details from each side spilled over into the other. A paint stain on the proper wife's collar, a wedding ring on. The passionate artist's hand. She wasn't choosing between them, I said, understanding flooding through me. She was showing how they both existed in the same person. Miles was studying the painting with his art historian's eye. The technique is extraordinary. Look how she's used color temperature to differentiate the emotional states while maintaining visual unity. But I was focused on something else, a small detail in the lower right corner that made my breath catch. Mom had painted herself holding two items, a paintbrush in her right hand, and in her left, a tiny house that was clearly our family home. She never stopped loving us, I whispered. Even when she needed something else, she never stopped loving her family. Emery was exploring the storage unit's organized boxes, reading labels aloud. Business correspondence, exhibition records, student work. She taught private lessons, I said, remembering Thomas's mention of the downtown studio. Another part of her secret life. "Jennifer, you need to see this box," Miles called from the back corner of the unit. He found a container labeled "for my daughter" in Mom's handwriting. Inside were items that made it clear Mom had been preparing for this moment for years. Copies of all her business records, a detailed inventory of her paintings with estimated values, and a leather portfolio containing what appeared to be a complete artistic autobiography. "Listen to this," I said, opening the portfolio to a page marked with a bookmark. "I began painting seriously in 2003, not as an escape from my family, but as a way to stay sane enough to be the mother and wife they deserved. Art gave me a place to put the parts of myself that didn't fit into their expectations." The autobiography continued for 50 pages, documenting Mom's artistic development alongside her emotional journey. She wrote about the guilt of needing something beyond family life, the joy of discovering her talent was real and marketable, and the careful balance she'd maintained between her two identities. "She talks about you constantly," Emery said, reading. Over my shoulder. "Listen, Jennifer inherited my artistic soul, but I pray she'd be braver than I was. I hope she'll never feel the need to hide her creativity, or apologize for being more than one thing at once." I was crying now, but they were strange tears, part grief, part relief, part anger at all the years we could have shared this passion. Openly, Mom had protected me from her secret, but in doing so, she'd also deprived us of the artistic partnership we could have developed. "There's more," Miles said, holding up a manila envelope marked "Financial Legacy." Inside were bank statements, trust documents, and a business plan that made my jaw drop. "She was planning to open a teaching studio," I said, scanning the documents. a place where older women could explore their artistic potential without judgment or time pressure. She'd been researching locations, developing curriculum, even designing marketing materials. The business plan was thorough and professional, outlining a concept for Second Chapter Studios that would offer painting classes, art therapy sessions, and exhibition opportunities for women over 40 who wanted to explore their creative sides. This is what she really wanted to leave you, Emery said. Not just money, but a mission. A way to help other women avoid the choice she felt forced to make. I walked back to the self-portrait, studying it with new understanding. Mom hadn't just been documenting her divided identity. She'd been showing me a different possibility. The braided border between her two selves suggested integration rather than separation, wholeness rather than division. She wanted me to be both, I realized aloud. The artist and the daughter. The creative soul and the responsible person. She didn't want me to have to choose. Miles was photographing the business plan documents when his phone rang. He answered it quickly, then looked up with an expression I couldn't read. That was my colleague at the museum. Jennifer, there's something you need to know about the timing of all this. What do you mean? Your mother's paintings have been generating interest from collectors for months. The museum has been getting inquiries about acquiring more of her work. If her estate had been handled normally, those paintings would have been part of the probate process and potentially accessible to Caroline. The implication hit me like a cold wave. But since Caroline doesn't know they exist, they're completely yours, all of it. The storage unit, the paintings, the business plan, the money, none of it appears in any official estate documents because your mother created this legacy separately from her legal identity. I looked around the storage unit with new eyes, calculating not just the emotional value, but the practical implications. 50 paintings by an artist whose work was gaining recognition. Over $100,000 in cash and investments. A complete business plan for a venture that could sustain me financially while fulfilling. Mom's vision for helping other women. Caroline had manipulated Mom's will to claim the family home and everything in it. But she'd only stolen the life Mom had performed for public consumption. The real inheritance, the legacy of who Mom was when she was most authentically herself, had been protected and preserved for me. What do I do with all this? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd discovered. You become who your mother wanted you to be. Thomas's voice came from behind us. We turned to see him standing in the doorway of the storage unit, his expression a mixture of sadness and hope. I'm sorry for following you, he continued, but I needed to see your reaction to Helen's final gift. She made me promise to check on you after you found everything. It's too much, I said. I don't know how to process it all. Start with the painting, he suggested, nodding toward the self-portrait. Your mother spent her last months working on that piece because she wanted you to understand something essential. You don't have to choose between being an artist and being part of a family. You can be both. As afternoon sun slanted through the storage unit doorway, I stood surrounded by 30 years of my mother's secret artistic life and felt something shift inside me. The grief that had been paralyzing me since her death was transforming into something else. Determination, purpose, and a sense of connection to Mom that was deeper than anything I'd felt while she was alive. Caroline thought she'd won by manipulating the will and claiming the house. But standing in this hidden gallery of Mom's authentic self, I realized she'd actually lost. She'd gotten the props from Mom's performed life while missing the real treasure, the artistic legacy that revealed who Mom truly was and who she wanted me to become. Wasn't going to hide this inheritance or apologize for it. I was going to claim every painting, every dollar, and every dream Mom had preserved for me. And then I was going to do something Carolyn could never do. I was going to honor the fullness of who my mother really was. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Thomas's office at SCAD, surrounded by authentication documents and market appraisals that confirmed what we'd all suspected. Mom's secret art career was worth substantially more than anyone had imagined. Her paintings were valued at over $300,000. An interest from galleries was growing daily, but it was the phone call from Miles that changed everything. "Jennifer, you need to get down to the museum immediately," he said, his voice tight with an excitement I'd never heard before. "And bring that copy of your mother's will, the one Carolyn presented to the lawyer." "Why? What's wrong?" "Not wrong. Just ... get here. Trust me." 20 minutes later, I was standing in the museum's conservation lab while Miles explained what had been gnawing at him since our first meeting. "When you brought in your mother's painting for preservation consultation, I noticed something about her handwriting," he said, pointing to her signature on the canvas. "Your mother had very distinctive letter formations. See how she makes her H with that little extra flourish? And the way her E's lean slightly backward?" "Okay, but what does that have to do with anything?" Miles spread out several documents. On the lab table, Mom's painting signatures, samples of her handwriting from the storage unit, and a photocopy of the will Carolyn had presented to the probate lawyer. "Look at the signature on the will," he said quietly. I stared at the document that had appended my life and slowly began to see what Miles had noticed. The signature read Helen Calhoun in what appeared to be Mom's handwriting, but the letter formations were subtly different. The hacked lacked her characteristic flourish. The E's leaned forward instead of backward. "That's not her signature," I breathed. "I don't think so either. But we need professional verification." Miles gestured to a woman I hadn't noticed before, standing near a microscope station. "This is Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic document examiner." I took the liberty of asking her to take a look. Dr. Chen was a small, precise woman who spoke with the authority of someone who had testified in court hundreds of times. "I've been comparing the question signature with authenticated samples of your mother's handwriting," she said. "There are several indicators that suggest forgery." She placed a magnified image of the will signature on a light table, next to magnified samples from Mom's storage unit documents. "Notice the pen pressure inconsistencies here and here. Your mother's natural handwriting shows very consistent pressure variation, but the will signature appears to have been written more slowly and deliberately." "Meaning someone was trying to copy her signature," I said, my heart beginning to race. "That's one possibility. There are also tremor patterns that don't match her authenticated writing. And most tellingly, the paper shows evidence of erasure. Marks beneath the signature line." Emery, who had been unusually quiet during this explanation, suddenly spoke up. "Carolyn had access to Mom's handwriting samples. She cleaned out Mom's desk drawers before anyone else could go through them." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Caroline's convenient business trip to Atlanta the day after Mom died. Her insistence on handling all the funeral arrangements alone. The mysterious new will that supposedly superseded the version Mom had discussed with me for years. "Can you prove it's forged?" I asked Dr. Chun. "I can provide expert testimony that the signature shows multiple indicators of forgery. But you'll need more than just handwriting analysis to challenge a probated will." Miles was already pulling up something on his computer. "What if we could prove Carolyn had both motive and opportunity to forge the document?" "What do you mean?" "I've been researching your sister's financial situation. Her company filed for bankruptcy 6 months ago. She was personally liable for significant debts, and facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement. The information hit me like a physical blow. Caroline's desperate need for money explained so much about her behavior during Mom's final months. The sudden increased attention, the insistence on updating legal documents, the way she discouraged me from getting involved in estate planning. She needed Mom's money to avoid prosecution, I said slowly. And when she realized Helen had been living below their family's financial means, no obvious assets beyond the house and basic savings, she probably panicked, Dr. Chen added. Forging a new will would have seemed like her only option. Emery was pacing around the lab like a caged animal. So what do? Can we get the will overturned? We need to prove several things, Dr. Chen explained. Forgery of the signature, which I can help establish. But also that your mother lacked the mental capacity to sign a new will, or that she was under undue influence. What about her medical records? I asked. Dr. Peterson said the pain medications sometimes caused confusion. Miles was already on his phone. I'm calling my lawyer friend. If we can demonstrate that Carolyn had both financial motive and exclusive access to your mother during the period when this will was supposedly signed. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls, document scanning, and legal consultations. By evening, we had assembled a compelling case that Carolyn had forged Mom's signature on a fraudulent will to steal an inheritance. She desperately needed to avoid criminal prosecution, but it was Thomas who provided the most damning evidence. Helen called me 2 weeks before she died, he said when we contacted him with our discoveries. She was upset because Carolyn had been pressuring her to sign documents she hadn't had time to read properly. Helen specifically told me she was going to wait until she felt clearer mentally before making any changes to her will. Did she say anything else about Carolyn's behavior? The lawyer asked. She mentioned that Carolyn seemed unusually interested in her financial situation. Asked questions about bank accounts, investments, even whether Helen had any valuable artwork. At the time, I thought Carolyn was just trying to help with estate planning. But now it looks like she was searching for assets to claim, I said. Or assets that might exist outside the normal estate process, the lawyer confirmed. If Carolyn discovered that Helen had been living modestly despite potential hidden wealth, forging a will to claim everything might have seemed like her only chance to access funds quickly. The irony was devastating. Carolyn had committed fraud to steal an inheritance that was nowhere near as valuable as the legacy she didn't know existed. While she was forging documents to claim the family home and its contents, the real treasure, Mom's art, her secret bank accounts, her authentic, creative legacy remained hidden and legally mine. What happens now? I asked. We file a motion to contest the will based on forgery and undue influence. With the handwriting analysis, the medical records showing your mother's diminished capacity during the relevant time period, and Thomas's testimony about her stated intentions, we have a strong case. How long will it take? Could be months. But, Jennifer, there's something else you should consider. If we prove Carolyn forged the will, she's not just facing civil penalties. Document forgery is a felony, especially when it involves estate fraud. I stared out the museum window at Savannah's evening skyline, thinking about my sister who had been so desperate to avoid criminal charges that she committed an even more serious crime. Caroline had always been the responsible one, the successful one, the daughter who made all the right choices. But her perfect life had been built on financial fraud, and when that collapsed, she'd been willing to steal from her own family too. Avoid consequences. She betrayed Mom. I said quietly, "Not just me, Mom. She took advantage of a dying woman's confusion to rob her of her final wishes." "Yes, she did," Thomas said. but Helen protected what really mattered. She made sure you would discover the truth about who she was and what she wanted you to have. Walking home that night, I felt the strangest mixture of vindication and sadness. We could prove Caroline had stolen my inheritance through fraud, and she would likely face serious legal consequences. The family home and everything in it would eventually be mine. But more importantly, I discovered that Mom's real legacy had never been at risk. Caroline could forge signatures and manipulate legal documents, but she couldn't steal or replicate the artistic soul that Mom had preserved. For me in that storage unit, she could claim Mom's performed identity, but she couldn't touch the authentic creative spirit that was my true inheritance. The woman who had manipulated our mother's final months to commit fraud had no idea that she'd stolen trinkets while leaving the treasure untouched. And tomorrow, we were going to make sure she faced the consequences for both her desperation and her betrayal. The confrontation with Caroline was scheduled for Thursday morning in the probate lawyer's office, but I spent Wednesday night in Mom's storage unit, surrounded by the evidence of her secret artistic life and trying to prepare myself for what was coming. "You don't have to do this," Emery said for the 10th time, sitting cross-legged on the storage unit floor beside a box of Mom's teaching materials. "The lawyers can handle everything. You don't need to face Caroline directly." "Yes, I do." I was reading through Mom's notes for her planned teaching studio, marveling at the detail and care she put into developing curriculum for women who wanted to explore their creativity later in life. She needs to understand what she tried to steal. Not just the house and the money, but the truth about who Mom really was. Miles was cataloging paintings for the insurance company, but I could tell he was listening to our conversation. "What do you hope to accomplish by confronting her?" It was a good question. Part of me wanted Caroline to suffer the way I'd suffered when she produced that forged will and smiled as she claimed everything that represented home and family. But there was something deeper driving my need to face her directly. "I want her to know that she failed," I said finally. "She thought she was so clever, manipulating a dying woman and forging documents to steal an inheritance. But she only got the surface layer of Mom's life. The real legacy, everything that actually mattered, was protected from her from the beginning." Thomas arrived as the sun was setting, carrying takeout containers from our favorite downtown cafe. We'd fallen into an easy routine over the past few weeks, meeting in the storage unit to sort through Mom's artistic legacy and plan for the future of her unrealized teaching studio. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" he asked, settling onto a folding chair beside Mom's final self-portrait. "Terrified." "Angry, ready." I accepted a container of shrimp and grits and tried to eat despite my nervous stomach. I keep thinking about what Mom wrote in her autobiography, how she spent 20 years feeling guilty for needing something beyond family life. Caroline never understood that complexity. "Your sister has always seen the world in very simple terms," Thomas observed. "Success versus failure. Right versus wrong. Valuable versus worthless. She never developed the emotional sophistication to understand that people can be multiple things simultaneously. That's what makes this so perfect in a twisted way," Emery said. "Caroline committed a serious crime to steal what she thought was valuable, but she was completely blind to the actual treasure." I looked around the storage unit, calculating not just the financial worth of Mom's hidden legacy, but its emotional and artistic significance. 50 paintings documenting 30 years of creative growth. Detailed business plans for a teaching studio that could help dozens of women discover their artistic potential. Personal records of a secret love affair that had sustained Mom through the compromises of conventional marriage. Caroline had forged a will to claim a house, worth maybe $200,000 in its contents. But Mom's authentic artistic legacy was worth twice that amount. And more importantly, it represented possibilities for creative fulfillment that Carolyn could never understand or appreciate. "I've been thinking about the teaching studio," I said to Thomas. "Mom's business plan is incredibly detailed. She'd researched everything: demographics, marketing, curriculum development, space requirements. She spent 3 years developing that concept," he confirmed. Helen believed there were hundreds of women in Savannah who had artistic potential they never explored because they thought it was too late or too impractical. What if it's not too late? What if I could actually make it happen? Miles looked up from his photography work. "You mean open the studio she planned?" "Exactly. Use the money from our secret accounts as startup capital. Find the space she'd researched. Hire qualified instructors. Create the environment she dreamed about." The idea had been building in my mind for days, but saying it aloud made it feel suddenly real and achievable. Mom had done all the preliminary work. I just needed the courage to execute her vision. "That would be an incredible way to honor her memory," Thomas said softly. "And it would give meaning to all the years she spent living divided between her public and private selves." "More than that," Emery added, "it would be the perfect revenge against Caroline. She stole what she thought was valuable and ended up facing criminal charges for fraud. Meanwhile, you're building something meaningful with the inheritance she never knew existed." As we worked through the evening, sorting paintings and reading Mom's notes for her planned classes, I felt something shifting inside me. The anger and grief that had been consuming me since the will reading were transforming into determination and purpose. Caroline had tried to erase my connection to family history by stealing the house where I'd grown up. But Mom had preserved something much more important: a roadmap for who I could become and what I could create with my life. "There's something else I want to do," I said as we prepared to lock up the storage unit. "When this is all over, when Caroline's facing the legal consequences of what she did, I want to donate some of Mem's paintings to the museum. Not for the money, but to make sure her work is preserved and displayed publicly." "Under her real name or her artistic pseudonym?" Miles asked. "Both. I want people to understand that Helen Calhoun and Helen Sinclair were the same person. A woman who found a way to honor her family commitments while nurturing her authentic creative self." Thomas smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from him since we met. "Helen would love that. She always worried that her artistic work would disappear because she kept it separate from her public identity." "Not anymore," I said firmly. "Tomorrow, Carolyn learns that she committed a felony to steal worthless props while the real treasure remained safely hidden. And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure Mom's authentic legacy lives on." Driving home that night, I felt more prepared for the confrontation than I had since discovering Caroline's fraud. She'd spent months manipulating our dying mother and forging legal documents to steal what she thought was my inheritance. But she'd been operating with incomplete information, seeing only the surface layer of Mom's carefully constructed public life. Tomorrow, she would learn that some treasures can't be stolen because they exist in places thieves don't think to look. Mom's artistic soul, her secret creative life, her dreams for helping other women, all of it had been preserved beyond Caroline's reach and passed to someone who could understand its true value. The woman who had betrayed our family for money was about to discover that she'd committed serious crimes for a fraction of what she'd unknowingly left behind. And I was going to be there to watch her realize exactly what she'd lost through her desperation and greed. The probate lawyer's office felt like a courtroom as we assembled Thursday morning for what everyone knew would be a decisive confrontation. Carolyn sat across from me, impeccably dressed in her Atlanta corporate armor, flanked by an expensive lawyer who kept checking his phone like he had more important places to be. She looked older than I remembered, stress lines around her eyes that hadn't been there at Mom's funeral. When she saw me enter with my legal team, her confident expression flickered for just a moment before reassembling into practiced superiority. "Jennifer," she said coolly, "I hope you've come to your senses about this ridiculous challenge to Mother's clearly stated wishes." I set a folder on the conference table between us and met her gaze steadily. "Actually, Carolyn, I've come to discuss your clearly documented fraud." The lawyer representing the estate cleared his throat and began reviewing the case we prepared. Dr. Chun's handwriting analysis was devastating in its precision, demonstrating multiple indicators that the signature on Caroline's will was forged. The medical records showed Mom had been heavily medicated and confused during the period when the document was supposedly signed, but it was Thomas's testimony that made Caroline's face go pale. Helen specifically told me she planned to wait until her mind was clearer before making any changes to her estate plans. He said via video conference from Skade. She was concerned about Caroline's sudden interest in her financial situation and felt pressured to sign documents she hadn't properly reviewed. "Who is this person?" Caroline's lawyer demanded. "What standing does he have in this matter?" "Thomas Whitmore was Helen Calhoun's closest friend for 20 years, my lawyer replied smoothly. "And he has information about Mrs. Calhoun's true financial situation that directly contradicts the assumptions underlying your client's actions." Caroline's confident mask was starting to crack. "What do you mean, financial situation?" "Mother lived modestly. The house and its contents represent the bulk of her estate." "That's what you believed," I said, opening my folder and placing Mom's secret bank statements on the table. "But it wasn't true." The silence in the room was deafening as Carolyn stared at documents that revealed over $100,000 in accounts she'd never known existed. Her lawyer grabbed the papers, scanning them frantically. "These accounts are in the name Helen Sinclair," he said. "Not Helen Calhoun. They're not part of the estate being contested." "Exactly," my lawyer confirmed. "Mrs. Calhoun maintained a separate artistic identity for 30 years, during which she built a successful career selling paintings through galleries in Charleston and Atlanta. This money represents the proceeds from that career." "That's impossible," Caroline said, but her voice had lost its earlier certainty. "Mother was a hobbyist. She never sold anything." I placed photocopies of gallery receipts and exhibition records. On the table, she sold consistently under her maiden name. In fact, several museums have been trying to acquire more of her work. Caroline's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror as she realized the implications. While she'd been forging documents to steal a modest inheritance, a much larger legacy had existed completely outside her awareness or reach. "But this doesn't change anything," her lawyer said desperately. "The will my client presented is valid regardless of assets not included in the estate." Dr. Chun's voice was crisp and professional as she delivered the final blow. "The signature analysis indicates deliberate forgery. The paper shows erasure marks beneath the signature line, and the witness signatures appear to have been added by the same hand that forged Mrs. Calhoun's name." The forensic evidence was overwhelming. Carolyn had not only forged Mom's signature, but had also falsified the witness signatures required to validate the will. The entire document was fraudulent, from top to bottom. "Carolyn," I said quietly, "why did you do it?" For a moment, her corporate mask completely fell away, and I saw my sister as she really was, desperate, frightened, and cornered by circumstances beyond her control. "My company was failing," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was personally liable for $2 million in debt. Criminal charges were pending. I needed. She stopped, seeming to realize she was confessing to additional crimes. You needed Mom's money to avoid prosecution for embezzlement, I finished. So you manipulated a dying woman into signing documents she couldn't properly understand. It wasn't like that. Carolyn's composure finally shattered. She was confused most of the time anyway. The medication made her paranoid and irrational. I was trying to protect the family assets from her poor judgment. By forging her signature, when she refused to sign willingly, the question hung in the air as Caroline's lawyer frantically tried to salvage the situation. But the evidence was too comprehensive, and Caroline's partial confession had made their position untenable. My client invokes her Fifth Amendment rights and will not be making any further statements, the lawyer announced. That's probably wise, the district attorney's representative said from the back of the room. I hadn't noticed her arrive, but apparently the DA's office had been monitoring the proceeding. Miss Calhoun, you're under arrest for estate fraud, document forgery, and elder abuse. What happened next felt surreal. Carolyn, the sister who had always been the responsible one, the successful one, the one who made all the right choices, was handcuffed and read her rights in the same conference room, where she thought she was claiming a stolen inheritance dot as they led her away. She looked back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Jenny, I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far. But I was done with her apologies and explanations. Carolyn had betrayed our dying mother for money that wouldn't have solved her real problems anyway. And in doing so, she'd revealed that she'd never understood what actually made our family valuable. After Carolyn was gone, the estate lawyer turned to me with something that looked like relief. Miss Calhoun, there's one more item we need to discuss. Our investigation into your mother's personal effects revealed another document. He placed a sealed envelope on the table, labeled in Mom's handwriting, my real will to be opened only if the other one is contested. She hid this in her downtown studio, he explained. Your mother apparently anticipated that someone might try to manipulate her estate and took steps to protect her true intentions. I opened the envelope with shaking hands and found Mom's actual will written in her clear, unmistakable handwriting and properly witnessed by Thomas and the studio landlord. The document was dated just 1 week before her death, during a period when her medical records showed she was lucid and unmedicated. I, Helen Sinclair Calhoun, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave my entire estate to be divided equally. Between my daughters Jennifer and Carolyn, I read aloud. However, I specifically exclude my artistic works and related business assets, which I bequeath solely to Jennifer, who alone has shown understanding and appreciation for the creative life. The will went on to explain that Mom had kept her artistic career separate from her family identity specifically to protect it from people who might not understand its value. She'd hidden the real will to ensure that her authentic wishes would prevail if anyone tried to manipulate the estate process. She played the long game, Emery said admiringly. Even dying, she was 3 steps ahead of everyone else. But the final paragraph of the will was what brought tears to my eyes. I hope that Jennifer will use this inheritance not just to support herself, but to help other women discover their own creative potential. Art should not be a luxury that only the young or privileged can afford. It should be accessible to anyone brave enough to pick up a brush and honest enough to put their truth on canvas. Mom had left me more than money or paintings. She'd left me a mission to create the teaching studio she dreamed of, to nurture other women's artistic souls the way she'd nurtured mine, to prove that creativity isn't something you age out. Of or run out of time for Dot as we left the lawyer's office, I felt the strange completion of a circle that had started with Caroline's betrayal and ended with Mom's ultimate protection of what really mattered. Caroline had committed serious crimes to steal a conventional inheritance, but Mom had preserved something infinitely more valuable, the legacy of her authentic creative self and the responsibility to share that gift with others. The sister, who had never understood the difference between price and value, was now facing years in prison for fraud. And I was walking away with the keys to my mother's secret, artistic kingdom and the blueprint for building something beautiful from her hidden dreams. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of what had once been an empty storefront on Bull Street, watching 12 women between the ages of 45 and 75 discover their hidden artistic talents. The space that Mom had researched and planned for years was finally alive with the sounds of creative exploration, brushes on canvas, gentle laughter, the kind of encouraging conversation that happens when people feel safe to try something new. Jennifer, look at what Margaret painted today, called Susan, a retired librarian who'd started coming to classes after her husband's death left her searching for new purpose. She was holding up a small watercolor of Forsyth Park that captured the late afternoon light with surprising sophistication. Margaret, a 72-year-old former accountant, beamed with pride. I never thought I had an artistic bone in my body. My ex-husband always said I was too practical for creative nonsense. Good thing we don't listen to ex-husbands here, I replied, studying her work with genuine admiration. This shows real understanding of color temperature. You've got natural instincts. Second Chapter Studios had opened 3 months ago, funded by Mom's secret inheritance and operated according to the detailed business plan she developed during her hidden artistic life. The space itself was everything she'd envisioned: high ceilings, northern exposure, comfortable seating areas where students could discuss their work over tea and homemade cookies. But more importantly, it had become exactly what Mom had hoped. For a sanctuary where women could explore creativity without judgment, comparison, or pressure to produce anything other than joy. How's the exhibition planning coming along? Asked Dr. Patricia Williams, a retired pediatrician who'd become one of our most dedicated students. She was working on an abstract piece that somehow captured the energy of children at play, despite being painted entirely in blues and greens. The opening is next Friday, I said, gesturing toward the gallery wall where we'd been installing work for our first student exhibition. 23 paintings by 15 artists, all of whom started painting here in the last 6 months. The exhibition was titled Hidden Talents, Art Beyond Age, and it represented exactly what Mom had dreamed of, proof that creative potential doesn't diminish with time. It just waits for the right opportunity to emerge. Thomas had volunteered to write the exhibition catalog, and his introduction perfectly captured what we'd accomplished. These paintings represent more than individual artistic expression. They document the courage required to begin again, to discover new aspects of ourselves, regardless of how many decades we've been alive. The bell above the studio door chimed, and Miles entered carrying coffee for both of us, a ritual that had developed since we'd started dating seriously 2 months ago. Our relationship had grown slowly and naturally, built on shared appreciation for Mom's artistic legacy and mutual commitment to preserving her vision. How are the classes going? Today? He asked, kissing my cheek before surveying the room full of focused painters. See for yourself, I said, leading him to where Eleanor, a 68-year-old former teacher, was working on a portrait of her late mother. The painting was simple but emotionally powerful, an elderly woman's hands holding a sewing needle, rendered with love and incredible attention to detail. Eleanor's been working on this for 3 weeks, I explained. She says painting her mother's hands helps her feel connected to memories she was afraid of losing. This was what Mom had understood about the value of art that Carolyn never could. It wasn't about creating something to sell or impress other people. It was about finding a visual language for experiences and emotions that couldn't be expressed any other way. My phone buzzed with a text from Emery. Just saw the article in the Savannah Morning News. You're famous! The local paper had run a feature story about Second Chapter Studios, focusing on how we were challenging stereotypes about aging and creativity. The reporter had been particularly interested in our scholarship program, which offered free classes to women who couldn't afford the regular tuition. We believe everyone deserves the chance to discover their artistic potential, I told the journalist. Age should be an advantage, not a barrier. Our students bring decades of life, experience to their art, and that depth shows in their work. The scholarship program was funded entirely by sales of Mom's paintings, which had been steadily appreciating in value since her works started gaining recognition. 3 galleries were now actively seeking her pieces, and the Savannah History Museum had acquired 5 paintings for their permanent collection. Your mother would be so proud, Thomas said, appearing beside me with his own cup of coffee. He'd become an unofficial advisor to the studio, occasionally teaching guest workshops on watercolor technique and always available to share stories about Mom's artistic development. I hope so, I said, watching Margaret attempt her first self-portrait, with the fearless enthusiasm of someone who discovered that it's never too late to surprise yourself. The mail arrived with our usual afternoon delivery, including an envelope I'd been expecting with mixed emotions. The return address was the Georgia Department of Corrections. Carolyn's letter was shorter than I'd anticipated. Jenny, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand now what I really stole from you. It wasn't the house or the money. It was a chance to grieve Mom properly without having to fight for what should have been yours all along. I also understand what I missed about who Mom really was. The prison library has art books, and I've been learning about watercolor technique. I think I'm finally starting to see what you and Mom always understood about the importance of creative expression. I have 18 months left on my sentence, and I'm planning to take art classes when I get out. Maybe someday you'll let me see the studio you built with Mom's real legacy. I love you, even though I lost the right to say so. Carolyn, I folded the letter carefully and put it in my purse. Forgiveness would take time, but Caroline's acknowledgement of what she'd really taken from our family felt like the beginning of healing. Everything okay? Miles asked, noticing my contemplative expression. Caroline's finally starting to understand the difference between taking something and earning it, I said. It only took prison and 18 months of reflection for her to figure out what Mom tried to teach us our whole lives. As the afternoon class wound down and students began cleaning their brushes and admiring each other's work, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful. Second Chapter Studios wasn't just honoring Mom's memory, it was proving her theories about the untapped creative potential that exists in people society often dismisses as past their prime. Same time next week? Asked Dorothy, a 70-year-old former nurse whose paintings of flowers were becoming increasingly sophisticated and emotionally complex. Same time every week, I confirmed. And don't forget about the exhibition opening Friday night. I want everyone to see how talented our students really are. After the last student left, I walked through the empty studio, straightening easels and organizing supplies for tomorrow's classes. On the wall hung Mom's final self-portrait, the painting that showed her divided identity, integrated into something whole and beautiful. Below it was a small plaque with words from her artistic autobiography. Art isn't about perfection. It's about truth. And it's never too late to start telling your truth. Thomas had been right months ago when he said Mom's greatest regret wasn't the secret life she'd lived, but that she'd waited so long to trust me with the truth. But maybe the timing had been perfect after all. If she'd shared her artistic success while she was alive, I might never have developed the independence and confidence needed to build something new from her foundation. Caroline's betrayal had forced me to discover who I was when everything familiar was stripped away. Finding Mom's hidden legacy had taught me that the most valuable inheritances aren't the ones written in wills. They're the ones written in memory, preserved in love, and passed through understanding rather than law-dot as I locked up the studio. And headed home, I thought about the exhibition opening next Friday and the women whose hidden talents would be celebrated there. Mom had dreamed of creating a space where creativity could flourish without apology or explanation. And that dream was now real, and Growing Caroline had stolen what she thought was valuable and lost everything that actually mattered. But I had inherited something she could never take or replicate: the responsibility of nurturing other people's artistic souls, and the joy of discovering that some legacies grow more valuable when they're shared. In the end, that was the real treasure. Mom had left me not just money or paintings, but the understanding that creativity is a gift that multiplies when you give it away. They say closure comes with the final chapter, but I'm learning that some stories don't end. They ripple forward, reshaping everything you thought was permanent. It's the morning after our first student exhibition at Second Chapter Studios, and I haven't slept. Not out of nerves, not even out of excitement, but because I can't stop replaying every tiny moment from last night in my head. The smell of paint and perfume mixing in the warm air. The laughter echoing against the brick walls. The way Eleanor stood by her mother's portrait, clutching her granddaughter's hand, and whispered, "I never thought anyone would call me an artist." She cried when someone asked to buy her piece. She turned down the offer, of course. Not because she didn't need the money, she did, but because it was the first thing she created that felt like a piece of her soul. And for the first time in her 70 years, she understood what it meant to protect that. I didn't expect the turnout to be so big. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder, a strange cross-section of Savannah life. Artists, museum curators, retirees, curious tourists, and a few wide-eyed teenage girls dragged in by their moms. And tucked quietly in the back corner was Thomas, wearing a charcoal blazer and watching the evening unfold like a proud father at a graduation ceremony. When I caught his eye across the room, we didn't need words. He smiled, that quiet, weathered smile that told me Mom would have been proud. And I believed it. Miles had printed a large format photo of Mom's self-portrait, the one from the storage unit, and hung it near the entrance with a placard that read, "Helen Sinclair Calhoun 19532-024, a woman of many lives." This exhibition is dedicated to her legacy and to every woman discovering her voice a second time around. Somewhere during the third wine pour and 15th compliment on the lighting, I excused myself to the bathroom and cried. Just for a minute. Just enough to let the emotion pass through. Then I looked in the mirror and saw a version of myself. I barely recognized not the broken daughter who sat in a lawyer's office being erased from her own family, but a woman who'd built something from ashes. Someone who was no longer waiting to be chosen. Someone choosing herself. And maybe that's what this whole story has been about. Last night, I caught snippets of conversations that reminded me just how far we've come. I used to paint before. The divorce, one woman confessed. I never even picked up a brush until my 60th birthday, said another. Now, I wake up thinking about color palettes. It hit me then, Second Chapter Studios wasn't just a space. It was a map for starting over. A room full of women who'd all been told at some point that they were too old, too busy, too practical, too late, but none of us are too late. Not really, Dot. After everyone left and the lights dimmed, I stayed behind to lock up. I stood alone in the middle of the gallery and whispered, "We did it, Mom." I swear I heard her voice in the silence. Art isn't about perfection, Jenny. It's about truth. I think I finally understand what she meant. Dear Caroline, I've started and stopped this letter more times than I can count. Sometimes I write in fury about the betrayal, the theft, the way you sat there in that lawyer's office and smiled, when my heart shattered in silence. Other times I write in sadness, remembering the nights we used to play go fish by flashlight during storms, or how you braided my hair before the 8th grade dance when Mom was too tired from chemo to lift a brush. But I never send any version because I'm not sure which version of me I want you to see. Some days I want you to feel every ounce of what you stole. Not just the house or the art or the inheritance that should have belonged to both of us, but the chance to grieve in peace, to walk into the family home without flinching, to say goodbye without feeling like I was in a war for proof that Mom loved me too. Other days, I remember your voice when we were kids, softer, curious, unarmored. You weren't always like this. There were years before ambition hardened your edges. Before fear made you cruel, Dot. Do you remember the summer Mom taught us both to paint wildflowers in the backyard? You complained the whole time, called it messy, nonsense, and gave up after 15 minutes. But I remember your first stroke. It was shaky, unsure. And when Mom told you it was beautiful, you beamed like someone who'd been seen for the first time in ages, Dot. Maybe that's what it's always been for us. A struggle over who got to be seen. I wish I could tell you how much Mom still loved you, even when you made her life harder. Even when she knew you were circling like a vulture in her final months, she still left room for you in the will, the real will, because she couldn't bear the idea of losing both of us. But you were already gone. You didn't just forge her signature. You rewrote her truth. You tried to silence everything she created in secret. The paintings, the studio plans, the part of herself she had fought so hard to protect. And yet, in some strange way, your betrayal forced me to find the parts of her you tried to bury, Dot. So here's the truth you never understood. You stole the house, and I got her soul. You got locked doors and cold assets. I got brushstrokes, handwritten journals, unfinished sketches, and a final self-portrait that's now hanging in a museum. I got letters addressed to me, passwords to bank accounts she opened with my future in mind, and instructions that said, "Jenny will know what to do with this." You didn't know how to see her, Caroline, not when she was alive, not when she was dying, not even now. She was never just a wife, never just a mother. She was a universe of color and contradiction and longing. She was brilliant and flawed and brave enough to live divided when the world wouldn't let her be whole. And you? You tried to reduce her to paper, to numbers, to a signature you didn't even forge properly. Now you write me letters from prison. You talk about discovering watercolors in the prison library like it's a miracle. And maybe it is, Dot. Maybe that's what grief does. It breaks us so badly that something new has space to grow. I haven't written back. Not yet. Maybe I never will, but I keep your letters in a drawer next to Mom's final journal. The one where she wrote, "Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means choosing to stop carrying the weight of someone else's failure." I'm learning how to put it down, Dot. Maybe one day I'll send this, maybe not. But I wanted you to know I'm not angry anymore. I'm busy teaching women who thought their best years were behind them how to pick up a brush, how to unearth joy, how to stop apologizing for taking up space, Dot, and every single day. I thank the universe that Mom trusted me to carry on the part of her life that mattered most. You'll never steal that from me. Jennifer, the plaque went up. Last week, Dot, it's a small thing. Brushed bronze, clean lines, mounted just beside the entrance to the studio. Most people walk past it without noticing. But those who do, stop. They lean in. They read, "In memory of Helen Sinclair Calhoun, artist, teacher, mother." This studio is built on her vision. That creativity is not a privilege, but a birthright. It felt like closure, but not in the way I expected, not an ending. More like a door closing softly behind me while another opened wide in front. Mom, single quotes, name is on the wall now. Not because she married the right man or died with a carefully ordered will, but because she dared to live truthfully, even when it meant doing so in secret. And now in the city where she lived in two halves, her full name is finally visible, fused into something complete. When I think back to the storage unit, that miniature gallery of her private world, I still get chills. I remember the smell of dust and old canvas, the sharp scent of oil paint that lingered even through the sealed boxes. I remember the first time I saw her final painting, the halves of her face, the different lives stitched together not in conflict, but in harmony. That painting now hangs in the Savannah History Museum. It's displayed in the women's art wing, under soft lighting, surrounded by artists who paved their own paths in quieter centuries. They call her a newly discovered Southern voice in watercolor. Critics use phrases like posthumous emergence and dual-life feminist iconography. But I don't need language to know what it means. She found a way to survive this world without letting it define her. The museum curator, a sharp-eyed woman named Georgia with a PhD in American art and a messy ponytail, told me, "It's rare to find work this honest, raw without being unrefined. You can feel the years she painted for no one's approval." I nodded because I knew Mom never painted for applause. She painted because she had to, because some parts of her couldn't be spoken out loud and pigment on paper was the only language they understood. Now her students are carrying that language forward. Eleanor, who once believed her creativity died with her husband, sold her second painting to a collector visiting from Atlanta. Susan, the former librarian, is designing a course syllabus for painting as memoir and has started mentoring our newer students. Even Margaret, practical, skeptical Margaret, just submitted a piece for a juried review in a regional art fair. She swears she's not a real artist, but her smile says otherwise. Every time one of them signs their name to a piece, I feel like a little more of Mom's legacy anchors itself into the world. They ask about her sometimes. My students, they want to know what kind of woman she was, what kind of teacher, what kind of mother. I tell them the truth, but not the whole story. Not all at once. I say she was two women, one, the kind you'd never forget and the kind you'd never quite understand. I tell them she loved magnolias in June, tea with honey, and the smell of turpentine. That she gave me my first set of brushes and said, "Don't worry if it's not good. Worry if it's not honest." I don't tell them everything about the will or the forgery or Caroline. I don't need to. That's my burden. And I've already learned how to carry it without bleeding every time I look back. What I tell them is this. She believed in second chapters, not just as a metaphor, but as a promise. That you could be 30 or 60 or 82 and still find something inside yourself that's wild and new and deeply necessary. And maybe that's why she built it all. The secret career, the savings, the studio plans, not just for herself, but for the women who would come after Dot, so when they stand at the easel and doubt themselves, I point to the plaque beside the door, in memory of Helen Sinclair Calhoun, artist, teacher, mother. And I say, she believed in you before she ever met you. Sometimes that's all someone needs to hear. Here's what I know now. Standing on the other side of everything, grief doesn't always look like we expect. It's not just crying in a dark room or aching when the birthdays and holidays come and go. Sometimes grief is quiet, soft. Sometimes it's waking up and reaching for your phone to text the person who isn't here anymore, only to remember, again, that they're gone. Sometimes it's joy that sneaks in and makes you feel guilty for smiling. And sometimes it's a painting, a face split down the center. 2 women in one frame. I didn't just lose my mother. I lost the version of her I thought I knew. And in her place, I found someone even more extraordinary. Someone human. Someone brave enough to live in the tension between duty and desire. Motherhood and freedom, marriage and art. There were things she didn't tell me. Things she kept behind locks and P.O. boxes and studio walls. But now I understand. It wasn't because she didn't trust me. It was because she was waiting for the day I was strong enough to carry it all. And I'm Second Chapter Studios is expanding. We've leased the space next door and are adding evening classes for working women. We just got our nonprofit status. And 2 weeks ago, we received our first grant, a modest but symbolic win that Mom would have celebrated with. Lemon tea and watercolor sketches of celebration balloons. Our next goal is outreach to local high schools, to reach the girls who are already being told to be quiet need. Reasonable. I want them to know. You don't have to choose. You can be the daughter and the rebel, the student and the artist, the woman who says yes to everyone else, and the one who learns how to say yes to herself. I know that now. Carolyn writes once a month. Her sentences have softened. She says she's teaching art basics to other inmates. She included a sketch in her last letter, a rowboat on still water. It wasn't technically refined, but it was peaceful. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw it away either. Maybe forgiveness doesn't look like what I thought. Maybe it starts with stopping the war inside yourself, with letting the anger settle into something quieter, not excusing the wound, but accepting that it happened and refusing to let it define everything that comes next. I haven't visited the family home since the legal settlement. It sits empty now, and I have no plans to reclaim it. Too many ghosts, too many echoes of a life I no longer need. I used to think I had to fight for that house to prove I belonged, that Mom had loved me just as much. But I see it now. Love doesn't live in square footage or antique furniture. It lives in what's passed down with intention. In letters and lessons and legacy. Mom left me a studio full of strangers who become sisters, a mission wrapped in brushstrokes. A roadmap to myself, and I followed it. Sometimes late at night, I close the studio and walk past the windows just to watch the paintings drying under soft light. The smell of linseed oil, the quiet creak of wooden floors, the hint of laughter that lingers even after everyone's gone. It feels like she's still here. Not haunting, not watching, just present. Like pigments soaked into canvas. When I was a little girl, I used to sit on the floor in her home studio, doodling suns and spirals while she worked in silence. I remember once asking her, "How do you know when a painting is finished?" She paused, paintbrush in hand, and said, "You don't. You just stop when it feels like truth." And that's what this whole journey has been. Messy, layered, incomplete. True. So maybe this story doesn't have a perfect ending. Maybe it doesn't need one. Maybe some things are meant to stay open, like windows or wounds or doors waiting to be stepped through. What I know now is this. My mother didn't leave me a house or a tidy legacy. She left me something better. She left me the courage to begin again, and I did. There is a moment right before the brush touches the canvas when everything holds still. It's not silence exactly, more like suspension, a breath between past and future, the heartbeat of possibility. That's where I live now, not in the certainty of outcomes, but in the bravery of beginnings. I hadn't painted anything for myself in nearly a year. Teaching, organizing, mentoring, all of it fulfilled me. But the truth is, after everything with Mom and Carolyn and the inheritance, I was scared. Scared that when I picked up a brush again, I'd either be chasing her ghost or revealing how much I still didn't know. But last weekend, I finally did it. I went into the studio early, before the sun, before the students, before Savannah stirred with its usual sleepy charm, and sat in front of a blank canvas. No music, no plan. Just me, the smell of turpentine, and the hush that only a clean surface can give. And I painted Dot not with hesitation, not with performance, but with memory and mess and something dangerously close to joy. I painted the porch of our childhood home, but not as it looked before Carolyn changed the locks. I painted it as I remembered it, in midsummer light with Mom's easel on one side and my sketch pad on the other, with iced tea sweating on the railing, with magnolia petals scattered like secrets across the floorboards. I painted the way it felt, not the way it was Dot, and when I stepped back 4 hours later, breathless and surprised, I realized I'd finally made something mine again. Not hers. Not ours. Mine. That night, I didn't lock the studio right away. I stayed in the stillness, watching the painting dry under the same northern light she once stood beneath. I thought about the way art threads through blood, not as inheritance, but as invitation. An open hand. There's this belief that you can only be one thing, that you have to choose artist or administrator, daughter or dreamer, stable or free. But Mom's life and everything I've learned since her death disproves that lie. She was all of it. So am I Dot? And maybe that's the real inheritance, the permission to be whole. We're launching a new workshop series next month, The First Stroke. It's for beginners, for anyone who's never painted but always wanted to. We're inviting women in recovery, in transition, in grief, women re-entering society after prison. Women like Carolyn might become. Thomas is helping us design the curriculum. Emery's writing copy for the flyers. Miles is building a documentary about the studio's impact. It's all bigger than I imagined. But not too big, Dot, because when I look at that painting of the porch, I see what this whole thing was always meant to be, a place to begin again. And I think if Mom could see me now, really see me, she wouldn't just be proud, she'd be at. The easel next to mine, she'd squeeze my hand, smile with that secret kind of knowing, and say, "It's never about getting it right, Jenny. It's about not being afraid to begin." So I began. Every day, Dot with a brush in my hand and the truth on my canvas. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.